Okay, in this video we're talking about estimating square roots. By the end of this lesson, the lesson objective is I can approximate or estimate the value of a square root. In the previous lesson, we talked about perfect squares and their square roots. You're going to need to call on that information and remember it and know some perfect squares to be able to estimate a non-perfect square. So how do I approximate or estimate the square root of a non-perfect square? Well, here are the 3 steps that you need to follow each time you do this. Please write these steps down so that when you're working through some of the problems, you can follow those steps and make sure that you're doing the process correctly. Okay, so the first step is you're going to find the 2 perfect squares that the number is in between. So you're looking for the 2 perfect squares, the one that's smaller than your number and the one that's larger than your number. Okay? After you do that, you're going to find which perfect square the number is closest to. I'll show you what I mean by that. Somewhere it's going to fall between those, and you want to look for the one that it's the closest to, that has the smallest difference. After you do that, you know what whole number you're close to, and you need to estimate it to the nearest tenth. So let's look at an example. So we're going to look at the square root of 55. We're going to approximate it. Here's what I know about the square root of 55. It's not a perfect square. So I'm going to follow the steps. I'm going to find the 2 perfect squares that this number is in between. I have a chart up here, and I look through and I see that 49 is smaller and 64 is bigger. So that's where 55 falls, is in between 49 and 64. Underneath, I put in parentheses the number that is actually squared, or the square root of 49 is 7 and the square root of 64 is 8. What I'm looking for is something in between 7 and 8 that is the square root of 55. So my next step is to find which perfect square that the number is closest to. Okay, so I look at the difference between 49 and 55, and that's 6. And I look at the difference between 55 and 64, and I know that that's 9. So when I look at it, I know that 55 is the closest to 49, or the perfect square 7. Okay, and then it's going to be important to me for this one to know that 56.5 is the center. How did I figure that out? I took 49 plus 64 and divided it by 2. So I know 56.5 falls right in between 49 and 64. 55 is really close to that, but a little smaller. Okay, so I'm going to estimate it to be 7.4. So the square root of 55 is about 7.4. I can check that on my calculator, and when I do that, I type in 55, I use the square root button, and I find that the square root of 55 is actually like 7.416198, blah, 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 blah. Okay, the only thing I want to know is to the nearest tenth. So I estimate it at 7.4 because it's just a little smaller than 56.5, which is half, and I know it's somewhere between 7 and 8. Probably confusing. You're going to get a lot more practice, but let's try one more together. Okay, we're going to approximate the square root of 24. The first thing we do is find the 2 perfect squares that the number is in between. When I look at my chart here, I find that the number is in between 16 and 25. And remember, the square root of 16 is 4, and the square root of 25 is 5. So I know that, really quickly, that the approximate square root of 24 is somewhere between 4 and 5. Can't be bigger than 5, okay? So I'm going to put my number in between here, and I'm going to put it closest to the one it's closest to, okay? I know that 24 and 16, there are 8 steps between it, the difference, and 24 and 25 are very close. So I'm going to scoot 24 over to 25 because there's only 1 step between that, and there are 8 steps between 16 and 24. Okay? The number that it's closest to is 25, right? We just talked about that, and it's really close to 25. Sorry. I should write all my words that I say. So when I estimate it to the nearest tenth, I know that it's probably going to be about 4 4.9. Remember, it can't be over 5, and it's really, really close to 25. So I'm going to estimate it at 4.9. Now let me check it on my calculator. 24 square root. Actually, it's 4.898979, blah, blah, blah. So I'm really, really close, and that's close enough. Okay, so I realize that you might not be proficient in it yet, but I want you to try these two by yourself. See if you can follow the steps and get close to the answer. We're going to do a lot more of this in class, and we're going to talk about it a lot more. So try it a couple of times and then come back and see how you did. All right, so let's see how you did. The first step, we're going to try and find the approximate square root of 37. So the first thing I'm going to do is find the two squares, perfect squares, that it's in between. Those two squares are 36 and 49. And underneath, I'm going to write their square roots. That's 6 and 7, because I'm trying to find the square root of 37. Okay? Now I have to figure out which one is closest to. Well, 36 and 37 are very close. There's only one step difference between the two. 49 and 37 have 12 steps in between it. So when I estimate this, I know it's going to be really close to 6. When I estimate it, I'm going to estimate it at 6, because it has to be between 6 and 7.1. When I check that on my calculator, 37 square root is 6.08. So 6.1 is close enough. If you would have said 6, that would have been close enough also, as long as you're pretty close to the square root, but 6.1 is more accurate. All right, and let's try the very last one. Now I made this kind of hard because on the chart you didn't have those perfect squares. You'd have to figure them out, but let's try it anyway. So the two perfect squares on either side of 135 are 121, which is the square root of 11. The square root of 121 is 11, sorry, and 144, and that square root is 12. So I know my answer is going to be between 11 and 12. It can't be bigger than 12. And then I look at which one it's closer to. 135 is 14 steps away from 12 and 9 steps away from 144. So we're much closer to 144. Because we're kind of in the middle, I'm going to find the center of 121 and 144 too, so that I can get a better estimate. I know that 132.5 is the center, so when I estimate, it's just going to be a little bit over 11.5. Okay? When I estimate this, I'm going to say it's 11.6. And that should be pretty doggone close. Let's try it. 135 square root is 11.61895004. So I'm pretty darn close. All right, write down any questions. I know this is a process. Trust me, when we do the worksheet tomorrow, we're going to go through the process. We're going to find perfect squares. We're going to find the one it's closest to, and we're going to get really good at it. Make sure you write your questions down and ask them during class.